Nancy took a deep breath and looked into Jonathan's eyes as she prepared to crack open the door to her past. The truth is, I'm not the Maria Miller you once knew. Jonathan remained calm, his silence inviting her to continue. The changes in my personality, in my understanding of technology, in my connections, they're because I changed. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to decide how much to give away. The engineers who are at the lab today, Peter included, I know them all. I called them here because they're the best of the best, and because it's the only way we're going to build the most advanced autonomous vehicle in the world. But bringing them in also means opening myself up to risk. There are people out there who want to try to harm me if they knew who I was. I'm telling you all this now because I can tell that my secrecy has hurt you, but also because I need your help. Jonathan smiled. Well, that's a sentence I never thought I'd hear. Nancy looked away, struggling to get the rest of her words out. If the worst should happen, if someone betrays me and I'm exposed, I'm hoping I can count on you for protection. Her words hung in the air between them before she looked up to meet his gaze, her lower lip quivering with raw emotion. Jonathan, you will protect me, won't you? He nodded firmly and spoke in a solid, unwavering voice. No matter what happens, no matter who or what comes to our door, I promise to always keep you safe. When I hide things from you, it's not because I don't trust you. It's because I feel like you're my only escape route, my only lifeline. My greatest fear is that if I reveal the whole truth to you, that lifeline will disappear. And then, so will I. She struggled to express the complex emotions in her heart and simply gazed at him with tearful eyes. Jonathan sighed and kissed her tenderly. Maria, I don't care who you were. I only care who you are. And who you are is the most brilliant, beautiful, charming woman I've ever met. Who you are is the woman I love. I will always provide for you, whether I'm in this world or not. Jonathan's words entwined themselves around her heart and tightened. All at once, she abandoned her stubbornness and rationality, dropped her defenses and disguises, and nestled into his embrace. A fresh wave of tears spilled from her eyes, but to her surprise, Jonathan suddenly pushed her away. He smirked, and with a mix of rudeness and tenderness, he wiped away her tears and gently pinched her cheek. Pull yourself together, champ. I'll take care of the damn omelets. Nancy looked up and saw the kitchen was still in chaotic disarray. There was spilled egg on the counter and the stove, and the spatula lay upturned on the floor, streaking the pristine tiles with grease. Jonathan set up to cleaning, and Nancy watched with increasing amusement as he tidied the floor and prepared the ingredients. She imagined him wearing a little floral apron and laughed out loud despite herself. He looked up with feigned anger. Hey now, you made this mess. And you're cleaning it up. Thanks, wifey. If you're well enough to make jokes, then you're well enough to help out. Get over here. Nancy tentatively walked toward the stove, and Jonathan pulled her in front of it, enveloping her from behind. The heat from the oil made her cheeks flush, and she stiffened as she recalled the pain from earlier. Jonathan kissed the top of her head. Didn't I promise to protect you? The problem before was that you had the burners on too high. The #1 rule with sautéing is low and slow. Nancy flinched as he put the diced vegetables into the oil, but as he predicted, there was no splash, just the gentle sizzle of caramelizing mushrooms. He then added the eggs to the pan in a smooth, swift motion and handed Nancy a clean spatula. Flipping it is the hardest part. Don't let me down, soldier. Nancy shook her head in bewilderment. Where did you learn to cook like this? I'm full of surprises. You're full of something. In her former life, Nancy had often fantasized about what the future might hold. Back then, before Stark's true colors were revealed, she had perceived him as a gentle older brother figure. During their engagement celebration, she tried to imagine what it would be like to have moments like this, sharing the simple domestic joys of cooking and washing dishes. But every time she entertained that notion, a sense of mundanity washed over her. With Stark, It always felt as if she was trapped in a soulless home. The thought of touching him repulsed her, and they hadn't even danced together at their wedding. Over time, her heart had completely frozen over, numb to the pain, but also to the joy. Now, witnessing Jonathan's culinary skills unfold before her eyes, something within her heart began to thaw. A warm, sweet sensation rushed through her veins and ignited a fervent longing for the days to come. At that moment, she committed herself to a new goal. Once she rescued Jacob and made Stark pay, she would immerse herself in the art of cooking. She would learn all of Jonathan's favorite dishes and relish in preparing them and sharing them with him. After dinner, when he was engrossed in his own tasks, she would seek solace in his study, losing herself in books until it was time to come back together again. The more Nancy dreamed, the more the days blurred together. A delicate smile adorned her lips, and an involuntary expression of bliss. Just then, Jonathan snatched the spatula from her hands and snapped her out of her daze. He flipped the omelets for her and winked. "Go wash your hands. It's time to eat." As Jonathan watched Maria step over to the sink, a wry smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He couldn't help thinking that she reminded him of a cat. Skittish, curious, mysterious, but once they trust you forever. Despite her withholding certain aspects of herself, he knew it was no small feat for her to tell him what she just had. Nonetheless, as they sat down to eat, he couldn't help but wonder who this Maria woman really was. If she truly wasn't the same person, she bore an exact resemblance, even closer than Olivia and Esther. He thought of her outsized reaction to the oil burn, the tears in her eyes, the desperate grip she had on him. If she was that afraid of fire, perhaps she suffered a terrible accident and then had some kind of procedure to make herself look like Maria? But then how would she have so seamlessly integrated herself into Maria's life? It all just seemed so preposterous. He had always been a man of cold logic, and Maria's confession defied logic entirely. He ached to know the truth, but forced himself to remember that at the end of the day, it didn't matter. He was in love with her, and for the first time, he believed she loved him too. The following morning, the piercing sound of an alarm jolted Nancy awake. She rolled over to greet Jonathan, but found his half of the bed empty. Unsure what it meant, she hastily did her makeup, got dressed, and headed out of the bedroom. As she turned the corner into the kitchen, Jonathan spun around holding 2 bowls of yogurt with fresh fruit and granola. They sat across from each other and traded flirtatious glances, and Nancy noticed that the heavy air of the precious night had all but vanished. It had been replaced with an easy intimacy that brought solace to Nancy's heart. Jonathan finally spoke up. "So, lab or headquarters today?" Nancy beamed. "Back at the lab. Oh, I arranged for the security chief to procure bedding and daily necessities for the dorms. If anyone works late, I want to make sure they have a comfortable place to sleep." Jonathan flinched. "I don't think that's a good idea, Maria. There's no reason anyone should need to sleep at the lab." "You don't understand. When the work really gets going, we'll have to—" But Jonathan cut her off. "If you're running late, I'll come get you myself. Otherwise, security can arrange transportation." "I don't understand. Are you worried about something getting into the lab or something getting out?" Jonathan stared at her wordlessly. It was clear he didn't trust her team. She didn't see the point of fighting first thing in the morning, so she offered a curt nod in agreement. Jonathan pinched her cheek. "Thank you, Maria. To make up for it, I'll drop you off at the lab myself this morning." When they finally arrived in Brooklyn, Nancy jumped out of the vehicle, eager to start her day. She turned around to say goodbye, but was surprised to see Jonathan stepping out right behind her. She narrowed her eyes. "Are you joining me inside?" Jonathan's reply was nonchalant. "Of course. If you say they're the best of the best, then I want to meet them." As they walked in, Nancy cringed. It was clear that Peter and the others had spent the night in the building's dormitory. Peter's eyes lit up when he saw Jonathan, and he stepped forward to introduce himself to the group. "Everyone, this is Jonathan Davis, the CEO of our magnanimous benefactor, the Davis Group." Professor Benedict chimed in. Mr. Davis, I believe we've crossed paths before. Jonathan nodded, recognition flickering in his eyes. We have. I have a dear friend who serves as a professor at the University of Houston. He always spoke highly of you. Summoning her courage, Nancy introduced Eduardo, Amanda, Jeff, and Mark. Jeff sighed, his voice tinged with envy. Look at this tall drink of water. Rich and ripped. Some men have all the luck. Laughter filled the room, finally dissipating the tension of Jonathan's unexpected arrival. His eyes drifted to the half-disassembled car in the back of the room, and he rested his hand gently on Nancy's shoulder. Looks like you all made quick work of the car I gifted Maria. A flush stained her cheeks. Don't be petty. If anyone on Earth can reassemble it, it's us. I wasn't criticizing. I've just never had someone turn one of my gifts into a pile of scrap before. Please, lead the way. Nancy led him over to the bare chassis of the Phoenix that he'd bought for her less than a month earlier. Its external panels littered the floor, and its electronic components were scattered across a number of workbenches. Jonathan chuckled. Suddenly, I'm not so worried about beating the Franklin Group anymore. He turned to Maria. If one car isn't sufficient, tell me, and I can arrange for however many more you need. Jeff chimed in again. Does that apply for all of us? Amanda kicked him in the shin. Just shut up and be grateful. Jonathan ignored Jeff's question. You all proceed ahead. I'll visit when time permits. But remember, if you need anything, just reach out to me or Jack. He affectionately ruffled Nancy's hair. Remember to eat lunch today, and call me when you're done later. Nancy nodded, her cheeks flushed with a mix of shyness and anticipation. As she watched Jonathan saunter out, she suddenly realized that was the closest she'd ever get to introducing a boyfriend to her family. When the blood finally settled from her cheeks, she turned around to address her team. But to her surprise, they all stood in a semicircle and stared at her with their jaws on the floor. Amanda piped up from the far end, igniting a fury of prying questions. I'm sorry, are you dating a billionaire? A flood of questions rained down on Nancy from her stunned teammates before Professor Benedict quieted them down and stepped forward. Maria, are you dating Jonathan? Nancy nodded shyly, her cheeks turning beet red. Look at you. In all the time we knew each other, I never heard you utter a single word of affection for a boy. When all your classmates were going on dates, you were laser-focused on your work. I'm so proud of you. A full life is a blessing. Amanda groaned enviously. Ugh, if I had a guy who looked like that and showered me with cars and kisses, I'd settle down too. Eduardo chuckled, patting Amanda's shoulder with a dark gleam in his eyes. You know green isn't a good color on you. Amanda turned to swat him, but Eduardo dodged with a laugh. Only proving my point, darling. Peter sidled up to Nancy, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. If everyone else is too afraid to ask, I'll do it. Ask what? Nancy narrowed her eyes. Did you give him a test drive yet? Oh my God! Nancy unleashed a playful assault of punches and kicks on Peter. What? I'm just saying he looks like he's got quite a bit of horsepower. Peter, you're disgusting. What's disgusting is letting a car that beautiful sit in the garage. When they finally got to work, the team spent the rest of the morning setting the sensors from the Phoenix and meticulously recording their findings. The camaraderie flowed, and it began to appear that the Franklin Group had made no substantial progress in the 3 years since their team had been disbanded. Maybe they weren't so far behind at all. Time raced by until Nancy's phone shattered the harmony. She answered, and Jonathan's voice crackled through the speaker. Maria, it's lunchtime. Don't forget. Of course I won't forget. Nancy's tone carried a playful edge. You don't forget to restock the eggs at home. Oh, so you're calling my apartment home now? Nancy blushed. Shut up. You know what I mean. She swiftly hung up and tossed her phone back on the workbench, grinning from ear to ear. During lunch, Nancy leaned over to Eduardo and whispered to him, "Can you still conjure up an optic membrane?" Eduardo raised an eyebrow. "Now why would a law-abiding woman like you want one of those?" "To take back what's mine." Eduardo nodded with a twinkle in his eye. "Give me a week." Nancy nodded in thanks. "One more thing. I need you to hack into the records database for the state of Texas." Eduardo rapped his rings on the table in excitement. "I like the new Nancy. What are we stealing?" Nancy couldn't suppress a laugh. "That's not what I meant. I need you to create a fake identity for my brother." "Jacob?" Eduardo furrowed his brow. "Isn't he safe in Houston?" "It looks like that from the outside, and he's watched incredibly closely. That's why I need a new identity for him, so I can bring him here and protect him. Consider it done." Nancy felt a surge of concern and put her hand on his shoulder. "Be careful, Eddie. Your safety is just as important to me." "Huh. There's the sappy girl I know and love. I'll be fine, Maria. Leave it to me." Over the next few days, Nancy became so immersed in her work that she forgot she had invited Emma to join the team. She screamed in delight when she finally saw Emma walk through the doors, and Peter rose to introduce her to everyone. Amanda stepped forward first. "Where do we keep finding these 20-year-olds that are more talented than me? Welcome to the team, Emma. Nice to bring a little more balance to this dude fest." Emma greeted each of them one by one and then eagerly joined in on the work. After a few hours, she made her way over to Nancy's station and set down a framed picture of them holding up their trophies at the Robotics Olympiad. Tears immediately burst to Nancy's eyes, and she hugged Emma tightly. "Help! I can't breathe!" Nancy let her go and locked eyes with her. "I'm so glad you're here, Emma. I told you the Olympiad was just the beginning for us. How is this even happening? How are we in charge of designing an entire car?" Nancy shrugged coyly. "I might have some connections." Emma gasped. "Oh my God, I knew it. You're dating Jonathan Davis, aren't you?" "Shh. I only got the rest of them to stop teasing me about it." "Well, whatever you did to get us here, I really appreciate you bringing me along." "Are you kidding? You're a better coder than half the people in here." Jeff suddenly piped up. "I heard that." Nancy smirked. "You were supposed to." She turned back to Emma. "This is it. This is the big time. And you earned it." Emma nodded, rolled up her sleeves, and got back to work. On Saturday, determined to ease her mind, Nancy arranged a shopping excursion with Esther. The two women shared a relaxing brunch before venturing into bustling Soho, their eyes captivated by the mirage of boutiques and flagship stores. A distinctive shop soon caught Nancy's attention. Their clothes were sleek and gender-neutral, a stark departure from the clothes she'd worn in her previous life, when she'd conformed to the social expectations of a demure lady from a wealthy family. Now, emancipated from convention, Nancy's heart fluttered with liberation. She grasped Esther's arm. "Let's pick outfits for each other, and then take pictures." 20 minutes later, their reflections in the mirror were barely recognizable. Nancy gathered her hair into a stylish bun and wore edgy metallic clothing from head to toe. In an instant, she became a captivating ethereal version of herself. In contrast, Esther's wavy locks flowed freely, perfectly complementing her formless dress. Embracing their newfound styles, the duo flitted from store to store before finally ending up at a movie theater. When they emerged from the movie, Nancy suddenly received a call from Jonathan. "Maria, I just got back from my business trip. Tell me where you are, and I'll come get you for dinner." Jonathan's voice resonated with eagerness, and Nancy felt like she couldn't say no. She contemplated for a moment, then replied, "Sounds good, but Esther is coming too. Whatever it takes to see you." Soon, Jonathan's car glided to a halt in front of the theater, and his eyes widened at the sight of Nancy and Esther in their new outfits. Nancy raised an eyebrow. "Well, what do you think? Are we not a sight to behold?" "If you love it, then I love it. Although it makes you look even younger. People might start to think the wrong things about me." Nancy's smile turned mischievous. That sounds like a you problem. Drawing closer, Jonathan's voice carried a playful hint. If you're going to act like a child, then don't be surprised if I spank you like one. Suddenly, Esther coughed loudly. You remember that someone else is in the car, right? Laughter filled the air as the trio made their way to the Diamond Club. But as they entered Jonathan's private room, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. Latham, Hannah, and Xavier were locked in a heated card game, and they looked up in unison when Nancy, Esther, and Jonathan walked in. Esther locked eyes with Xavier and clenched Nancy's hand, a brief twinge of anxiety flashing across her face. Before Nancy could pull her aside, Hannah leapt to her feet and bounded over. Oh my God, Sabrina! I'm your biggest fan. I absolutely adore unique perfumes. I already have 3. Esther extended her hand with a warm twinkle in her eyes. Then I'll have to create a special one just for you. What's your name? Hannah! Come sit down. I have a million questions for you. Hannah and Esther immediately connected and dove into animated conversation. Latham tried to interject himself, but Hannah quickly shooed him away. Shrugging, Latham took a seat and turned to Jonathan with a hint of sarcasm. Seems like someone has miraculously risen from the ashes and returned to life. Hannah shot a steely grin at him. Or maybe you're just not as interesting as Sabrina is. Xavier spoke to Latham, but his gaze was fixed on Esther. She's got a point, Lath. All you talk about these days is being single. Jonathan turned toward Nancy and pushed a menu toward her. I hired a special chef just for tonight. He specializes in all your favorites. Nancy's eyes went wide at all the tantalizing options. She looked back at Jonathan and narrowed her eyes. What if I order one of everything? I'd be offended if you didn't. In no time, the dishes arrived, and Jonathan placed a tiramisu in front of Nancy with a playful smile on his lips. See if this satisfies your cravings. Nancy took a bite, and her eyes lit up. She couldn't help but moan in pleasure. Oh my God, this is incredible. You have to try a bite. Jonathan took the spoon and scooped up a bite, but instead of eating it himself, he fed it to Nancy. She tried to dodge him, so he smeared it on her face. Nancy gasped, then lunged forward and kissed him, smearing the cake on his face too. Suddenly, Latham shot out of his seat, unable to hide his frustration. Oh my God! Would you two please get a room? Jonathan smirked. Technically, this is my room. And everyone else in it is single. Back me up, Hannah. Hannah spoke softly, her gaze pointed at the floor. I don't really have an opinion. Latham glanced at Xavier, but he shrugged. Like I said, all you talk about is being single. Finally, he turned to Esther. Surely you have something to say about this? Esther sighed and walked over to Latham, putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. No one feels more pain than me when someone snatches Maria away. Don't pour salt on my wounds. Latham grumbled and sat back down, and Esther shot Nancy a wink. Just then, Esther's phone rang, and she had a brief, terse conversation before turning back to the room. I'm so sorry, everybody. Something just came up with the lease on our next unique store, and I have to go deal with it. Do you want me to come with you? Nancy began to rise, only for Jonathan to gently push her back down in her seat. She shot him a glare, but he had already turned to Latham. If our company makes you so miserable, why don't you give Esther a ride home? Trust me, I'd love to get out of here, but my driver is running errands. Jonathan turned to Xavier. Do you mind? Xavier hesitated like he was looking for a way out, but finally nodded. Sure. Esther and Xavier stood in strained silence in the elevator. She glanced over at him, but his eyes remained firmly planted on the doors in front of him. When they got to his car, he finally spoke in order to ask for her address, but otherwise seemed content to sit in silence. Esther studied his face while he drove, and noticed that Xavier exuded a darker aura than he did when they first met. His features, once pale and soft, now bore a striking ruggedness. Gripping the steering wheel with one hand, his rolled-up sleeves revealed a forearm that blended strength and elegance. His fingers were lithe, and his immaculate fingernails suggested he had a thorough and precise way of doing things, but not without an aesthetic flourish. Finally, Esther spoke. "Thank you for the ride." "No problem." His gaze remained focused on the road ahead, projecting an air of icy determination. "It's good to see you again." There was a beat of silence, then Xavier's gaze suddenly snapped onto her. It was the first time they'd locked eyes all night, and his penetrating stare made Esther gasp. A taunting grin snaked across his mouth. "It's good to see me? We both know you don't mean that." Xavier offered Esther a fleeting smile, but his eyes remained motionless. Sensing that he had no intention of responding, Esther rolled her eyes and looked down at her phone. Her focus remained there until the car came to a stop, and Xavier spoke, without so much as a glance at her. "We're here." She looked up to see they were at her store near Times Square, then quickly unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car. A radiant smile graced her face as she waved goodbye, but Xavier offered only a nod in response. Esther smiled wistfully as she watched him drive off, then suddenly got a call from Nancy. "You've made it there, haven't you?" "Just got here. No need for concern." Nancy's voice faltered slightly on the other end. "I was just worried. Xavier isn't exactly a conversationalist. I thought it might be uncomfortable for you." His silence, that was the mystery that pulled me in the first place. Nancy's voice spiked with curiosity. "In the first place? Do you two know each other?" Esther leaned against the wall as nostalgia washed over her. "I wasn't sure it was him when we ran into each other after the promo shoot, so I didn't bother telling you about it. But yes, we have a bit of history." "What? When?" "After you disappeared 3 years ago, I became consumed by melancholy. I rarely ate. I stopped seeing friends. I couldn't bear the thought of dating. But about 6 months later, I found myself on the receiving end of someone's attention at the mall. He was a nobody like always, but it got me thinking. For my whole life, I had always been pursued, and I had never been the pursuer. I liked the idea of changing roles, and that's when Xavier came into my life. We met when I was pitching one of my companies to investors. He was on the board of one of the firms, and I found his energy intriguing. He was strikingly handsome, but rarely spoke, and when he did, he exhibited no charm whatsoever. I figured a man like him had to be a hard nut to crack, and my life had lost so much of its joy that I decided the challenge might be a fun distraction. Starting that very afternoon, pursuing Xavier became my personal quest. But it was harder than I expected. Our conversations were painfully one-sided, and when he did bother to speak, it was only ever about work, and in the driest possible way. Ordinarily, I would have run screaming from the room, but this time the challenge fueled me, gave me a silly sense of purpose that I'd been lacking. So first, I started finding ways to accidentally cross paths with him. She paused for an embarrassed laugh. "Nancy, I was walking 10 miles a day, just following him from place to place until I saw a good opportunity to get involved. Can you imagine that? If it was a hot day, there I would be with some water. If it was raining, I'd magically show up with an umbrella. I pursued him relentlessly for 3 months." Esther paused and Nancy cut in, enthralled. "What happened next?" "In one way, it worked great. I was getting exercise. I was feeling motivated. My little game really did pull me out of my funk. But with Xavier, not so good. On his birthday, I baked him an elaborate cake and planned to surprise him. But as I arrived at his office, I saw another woman in his arms, and both of them were laughing." Nancy hastily offered a lifeline. "Could it have been a relative? Or maybe Hannah?" Esther's voice took a solemn turn. "No. I knew all about his friends and family by that point. It was clear that he had chosen someone else, and I was never going to break through. So I left." Esther paused again, trying to articulate her emotions. "It's funny. I started out viewing him as kind of a joke, but when I saw him with that other woman, I was genuinely hurt. It was as if I was bearing my soul and offering him all of it, only to be overlooked. I felt like a clown. So I returned home and ate the entire cake in solitude. Then I texted him, "I'm done. Sorry for the hassle." And for the first time ever, he replied right away. He sent a single, gut-wrenching word. "Okay." Esther laughed ruefully. It echoed around her empty store as she unlocked the front door and let herself in. "What did you do next?" Nancy's voice hummed with anticipation. "What else? When you get dealt a crappy hand, you fold. Besides, men are like clothes. Just because I try one on doesn't mean I have to buy it, right? Let's just say Xavier fell out of trend for me." Esther and Nancy both laughed until she suddenly noticed that the door hadn't closed behind her. She spun around to see why, and her laughter turned into shock when she saw who was standing in the doorway. It was Xavier. From the other end of the phone, Nancy's voice echoed with concern. "Esther, are you okay?" Esther laughed nervously. "Speak of the devil. I'll call you right back." Esther ended the call and laughed nervously. "Fancy seeing you here." Xavier handed her a bracelet, his face as stoic as ever. "I found this on the front seat. Yours, I presume?" Taking the bracelet, Esther managed to nod. "Yes, thank you. Sorry you had to drive all the way back here. Can I get you something for the trouble? A new scent on the house?" Xavier just shook his head and walked out, leaving Esther alone in her store. As he got back in his car and disappeared into the night, Esther's expression morphed into a satisfied smirk. She glanced down at her bracelet and put it back on her wrist. Hook, line, and sinker. Xavier drove back toward the Diamond Club for a critical meeting with Jonathan. He tried to focus on the contracts they were supposed to review, but his mind involuntarily wandered to Esther. He couldn't believe that she was the same woman that had pursued him so relentlessly. She used to be so meek and servile that he would never have imagined her running a massive fashion brand. He'd also never seen her dress so casually. It oozed a confidence that he never knew she had. A faint chuckle escaped his lips, recalling what she'd said to him. Men are like clothes. It was exactly the reason he never pursued her years earlier. He had always found her beautiful, but a friend at college said she was notorious for never staying in a relationship longer than 3 months. Intrigued, Xavier made a wager. He would completely ignore Esther for 3 months, and if she was still pursuing him, he swore to go out on a date with her. What he hadn't expected was to find himself increasingly invested. As the days unfurled, Esther somehow weaved herself into the fabric of his life, a near-constant presence that fluttered around the periphery. She infiltrated his friend group, got his phone number, and began texting him good night and good morning. Then came his birthday, and an unexpected encounter with a former classmate. She turned up in his office with a birthday banner, but as she was trying to hang it, she fell off a chair and right into his arms. The party was a nice gesture, but Xavier had never loved crowds, so he took the first opportunity to slip out. Night soon descended, and it came with a swarm of messages. But he only remembered one of them. It came from Esther, and it read, "I'm done. Sorry for the hassle." He glanced at the calendar. Exactly 90 days had transpired since they first met. Thinking back on everything, Xavier couldn't help but wonder whether the 3-month clock on their relationship had just started anew. Later, in the shimmering opulence of the Diamond Club, Nancy found herself sitting across a table from Jonathan and Xavier. They were lost in a labyrinth of contracts for forthcoming Davis Group projects, but Nancy was off in her own world. Eduardo had told her to expect news about her brother's new identity, and she was staring at her phone, waiting for his call. She didn't notice Jonathan and Xavier wind down their meeting, and Jonathan suddenly took her by the arm and guided her toward the sweeping panorama of the floor-to-ceiling windows. His voice was low and comforting. "Maria, what's got you so agitated?" "Nothing." Nancy's heart fluttered like a bird lost in a storm. She didn't know how to tell Jonathan what was really going on. Her gaze darted across the room and came to rest on a piano. A spark ignited in her eyes. Is that a piano? Caught off guard, Jonathan blinked in surprise. Yes. Do you want to play? No. I want you to. Latham, ever the keen observer, heard their exchange and sauntered over with a mischievous smirk. He'll try to be modest, but Jonathan can tickle the ivories with the best of them. I can't believe he hasn't shared his special gift with you yet. Nancy grabbed onto Jonathan's arm, and her eyes gleamed with anticipation. Play for me? Caught in the crossfire of Nancy's begging and Latham's taunting, Jonathan rolled his eyes and relented. Against the backdrop of soft lights, he sat down and cracked his knuckles. When he began to play, the sound hit Nancy's ears like a lightning bolt. It was her favorite song, Moonlight Sonata. The room darkened as Latham manipulated the lights and created an intimate stage with Jonathan at the center. As Beethoven's delicate opening bars echoed through the room, Jonathan was bathed in a soft, shifting glow. Tears welled in Nancy's eyes as she thought of all the difficult moments the song had gotten her through over 2 lifetimes. Gradually, Nancy's anxiety gave way to calm, and she found herself engrossed in Jonathan's soulful performance. She savored every melancholic note, shutting her eyes to let a fantasy play out, a world where she never had to leave her old body, but still came to know Jonathan the way she had as Maria, a world where she was safe, happy, and whole, a world where she could just be herself, a world she had never known and never would. Her heart pounded in her chest, a rhythmic cadence that sent a flush creeping up her cheeks. When she finally opened her eyes, she looked up at Jonathan, and he called her over with a nod of his head. She slowly rose and walked over to the piano, taking a seat next to him on the bench. As the song crescendoed, Jonathan leaned over and whispered in Nancy's ear. I was there with you in Houston. I watched you from the shadows while you played this song. Nancy's eyes widened in disbelief as she looked into Jonathan's. Beneath the dim light, his face was an enigmatic silhouette, but his eyes gleamed like twin stars in the night. She was thrown into a storm of recollections. The coin she had thrown into the fountain that had magically changed direction. The ghostly shadow in her picture at the bell tower. Has it been Jonathan all along? A surge of emotion swelled within Nancy as she watched Jonathan play her favorite song, a blend of sweetness tempered with a hint of bitter nostalgia. But as the bitterness dissipated, a peaceful tranquility washed over her, as light as a breeze. Jonathan nodded to the keys, and he put his right hand over Nancy's knee. Understanding him right away, Nancy seamlessly stepped in to play the right hand, while Jonathan continued on his left. They charged into the final bars of the song in perfect sync, a silent affirmation of their blossoming partnership. Unbeknownst to her until now, Jonathan had been her unseen protector, her silent hero, asking for nothing in return. As the song's last note lingered in the air, Jonathan's eyes remained locked on Nancy. She wrapped him into a gentle hug, kissed him on the lips, and whispered quietly, "Thank you." Jonathan turned to her with a tender smile and ruffled her hair affectionately. But their intimate bubble was suddenly burst by the blaring ring of Nancy's phone. She took it out, and seeing that it was Eduardo, she sprang to her feet, and her voice was suddenly laced with anxiety. "Eduardo, I'm begging you. Tell me you have good news." Her heart pounded in her chest, but Eduardo's voice came through clear and confident. "Go get your brother, Nancy." Her grip on the phone tightened, her hand trembling with anticipation. "Do you mean?" "I not only set up a new identification, I also got him a new passport. It should arrive this week." His voice brimmed with triumphant exhilaration. "Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Eduardo. You know I'm always here to fight the good fight, especially if it involves hacking, or stealing money, or light treason. Let me know if you need anything else. Otherwise, I'll see you back at the lab, boss." Eduardo hung up, and Nancy's expression betrayed the whirlpool of emotions raging within her. Maria, what's wrong?" Suddenly, like a comet shooting across the sky, Nancy launched herself into Jonathan's arms, her joyous cry reverberating throughout the room. "We did it, Jonathan! We actually did it!" For a moment, he seemed taken aback, but he quickly wrapped his arms around her, and a broad smile stretched across his face. "Well, that sounds like a cause for celebration. Out of curiosity, though, what exactly are we celebrating?" Nancy pulled back from the hug and locked her eyes with him. "Jonathan, there's something you need to know, but I can't tell you in front of everyone. Can we find somewhere private?" As Jonathan led Nancy to a private room, Hannah watched from the corner, her heart heavy with a profound revelation. She had just witnessed a version of Jonathan she'd never seen before, tender, vulnerable, and utterly in love. He wasn't the Jonathan she'd grown up with, the protective older brother who always had watched over her like a warrior stone. This Jonathan lavished attention on Nancy, tantalized her with her favorite foods, navigated awkward moments with empathy and grace, serenaded her with songs of affection, and talked about their future with hope. Hannah's mind raced back to her 11th birthday, a day etched deep in her heart, the day she met Jonathan. He had come bearing a cake, and as he presented it, she felt her young heart flutter for the first time. She closed her eyes tightly as she blew out the candles, and she whispered a wish for a lifetime spent in Jonathan's comforting shadow. When the party finally ended, she followed Jonathan from a distance as he walked home. Bathed in the ethereal glow of the moon that night, Jonathan appeared to her like a god out of a storybook. The simmering love in her heart threatened to boil over, and before she knew what she was doing, she dashed after him. Her steps echoed in the quiet night, and he spun around just as she arrived in front of him. Even at 15, he was already tall, dark, and handsome. She took a deep breath, and in a voice laced with timid hope, she spoke. "Jonathan, why are you so kind to me?" Her secret wish was to fast forward through the years, to be his equal, to share the beautiful mosaic of life with him. But Jonathan offered only a gentle smile. "Your brother is my best friend. If you're his sister, then I figure that makes you my sister too. That will always be true." With a comforting pat on her shoulder, he walked her back to her home and offered her a coat to shield her from the cold. That night, Hannah cried herself into a fever, her heart aching with the bittersweet acceptance of his fraternal affection. She gave up all hope of attracting his attention until a few years later, when her brother died. Just as Jonathan had promised, he was there for her every step of the way. But Hannah was lost in a haze of sadness, and fearing the loss of his supportive presence if she revealed her love for him. She continued to keep it buried deep inside. By the age of 18, Hannah had bloomed into an elegant, beautiful young woman. While Jonathan was on the threshold of graduating from college, she was about to start, so he had offered to drive her to school and give her the grand tour personally. Hannah spent days preparing for their time together, elated at the thought of them being alone together both as adults. Unfortunately, when he arrived to pick her up, she was dismayed to see he'd brought a friend. He clearly hadn't been as excited as she had to have alone time. Then, to add insult to injury, Jonathan introduced her as his sister. And when his friend joked about Hannah's good looks, Jonathan waved it off without a thought, saying that he never looked at her that way and never would. She knew he only meant it to make her feel safe, and that only made her love him more. Nonetheless, he had torn her heart in two for the second time. Over the years, she'd had a string of boyfriends that were all just dim reflections of Jonathan, each one bearing some trait that reminded her of him. Each relationship was a muted echo of the love she held, but forever kept secret. Those memories haunted every crevice of Hannah's love life and led her to draw an impervious boundary, an emotional Berlin Wall between her and the men she dated. A touch, a kiss, any moment of closeness felt too precious to squander on them when the man of her dreams felt so tantalizingly close. Predictably, one after another of her boyfriends had walked away, leaving her to contemplate her unrequited love in solitude. Now, as she watched him shower Nancy with the affection she had always longed for, she realized that her love had become a poisoned chalice that she sipped from willingly, for it held the only intoxication she ever knew. Jonathan. Oblivious to Hannah's despair, Nancy followed Jonathan into a private room and shut the door behind them. Before he could even ask what was on her mind, her words flew out, tripping over each other as she tried to catch him up. Do you remember my engineer, Eduardo? The one that looks like a hippie Hells Angel? He's pretty hard to forget. Well, he got me an unregistered optical membrane and a legit Texas state ID. Jonathan shook his head, baffled, and Nancy realized she needed to start at the beginning. Sorry, I know how that probably sounded. So before Esther and I met, her best friend was actually a student of Professor Benedict's down in Houston. Her name was Nancy, and she was the sole heir to the Franklin Group before she died and her ex-husband Stark took over. It turns out that Nancy's little brother Jacob is in grave danger now, and he reached out to Esther for help. Esther came to me, and this is all part of the plan to get him to safety. Jonathan's brow creased at the sound of Nancy's real name, but she didn't notice and kept explaining. Stark himself is the one holding him hostage, and there's no way I can get around someone that powerful on my own. I need your help. She waited with bated breath, but Jonathan's reply was quick. Of course, anything you need. But how was all of this going to work? Nancy laid out her plan in detail, which involved distracting Stark with a fake meeting in New York, cutting the power to his home where Jacob was being held, and using the chaos of the blackout to spirit Jacob away. Jonathan nodded along, then took her by the shoulder. If Jacob is in as much danger as you say, then I'm happy to do this for you. But only on one condition. You stay in New York and far away from danger. Leave this to my professionals. Nancy started to protest, but knowing Jonathan would never sanction her putting herself in harm's way, she simply nodded. In truth, she planned to be there no matter what. There was something else she needed to retrieve from her family's old house, and only she knew where it was hidden. I'll stay here, I promise. Jonathan sighed with relief, and Nancy suddenly had a thought, smiling coyly. You agreed to do it so quickly. What if my intentions were nefarious? Jonathan smiled back at her. My dear, if you were plotting a murder, I'd help you hide the body. Nancy laughed, but she noticed Jonathan's expression suddenly grow distant. What's the matter? You trust me, right? Of course. It's not that. It's just... How do you know Esther again? Nancy's face twitched. She wasn't expecting him to question her relationship with Esther. I told you. We met online and I started helping her with some designs. And when did you say that was? 3 years ago. Why are you suddenly pestering me about Esther? While you were telling that story, I realized that I've seen her before. A long time ago. I'm sure it was just Olivia. It wasn't. I'm positive. It was her birthday, and she was on the phone with this woman who... Suddenly, Jonathan had a far-off look in his eyes. A flash of irritation played across Nancy's face as she tried to figure out what he was getting at. When he remained silent, she waved a hand in front of his face. Earth to Jonathan! I just told you I want to rescue a boy who's basically being held hostage by your biggest rival, and now you're daydreaming about Esther? What are you trying to say? Just spit it out. Jonathan sighed deeply and locked eyes with Nancy. Remember when I told you about the only other girl I had feelings for? The one who died before we ever got to speak? Oh my God, what does that have to do with anything? Maria, listen to me. That girl was Nancy. Nancy's jaw dropped. She was in a state of sheer disbelief at Jonathan's revelation. Had he really held a flame for her in her past life? She was certain she had never crossed paths with him before she became Maria. Before she could gather her thoughts, Jonathan hastened to reassure her. Maria, please understand, that was a different lifetime. A fleeting crush is all it was. Since the moment you graced my life, you've been the sole occupant of my heart. Nancy, however, was too absorbed in a sea of confusion and doubt to hear him. Try as she might, she failed to dredge up a single memory of crossing paths with Jonathan in her past. Burning with curiosity, she finally pressed him. How did your paths cross? Maria, please don't. There is no love story there. We only ever saw each other a handful of times. Nancy's curiosity refused to be stilled. Then tell me about them. But it's totally irrelevant to... Just tell me. Nancy's curiosity had transformed into an unquenchable thirst. The idea that Jonathan had once harbored affection for her felt surreal, almost dreamlike. With a deep breath, Jonathan capitulated and told her the story. The first glimpse I ever caught of her was at the University of Houston. A rainstorm came out of nowhere, and we both got trapped under the same awning. When my professor came to meet me, Nancy assaulted him with a million questions about a design he'd come up with. Weirdly enough, she was in AI and robotics just like you. Nancy dived deep into the recesses of her mind, trying to resurrect the memory of the rainy day that had, unbeknownst to her, etched itself on Jonathan's heart. She couldn't recall a single thing, but she had to admit it sounded like something she would have done. Jonathan's voice softened, and a tender smile played on his lips. I was a ghost to her. She was completely oblivious to my presence. That's what got my interest. Even still, I would never have thought of her again if I hadn't come across her a few months later at a concert. This is going to sound crazy, but the song she played that night was Moonlight Sonata. Jonathan continued to unfold the story of their past, constructing a narrative where their lives had subtly touched and intertwined without ever quite making contact. As he told the secret history of their love, Nancy's bewilderment and jealousy began to dissipate, replaced by an intense wave of euphoria and satisfaction. He had confessed to being charmed twice, first by Nancy and then Maria, and it had been her both times. The revelation ignited a mischievous grin on her face. She was going to have some fun with this. She feigned a sarcastic pout. I had no idea you two shared such a rich history. What a tragedy you were never able to confess your love to her. Jonathan stammered. You forced me to tell you about her, and now that I have, you're even more jealous? Your mind is a maze, Maria. Nancy shot back with a frown. About time you solved it, don't you think? Please believe me, in the chambers of my heart, there's only room for one, and it's you. He leaned in to seal his promise with a kiss, but Nancy evaded him. So, you harbor no feelings for her anymore? Or is that just because she's not around to draw your eye? I know how men are. He wrapped Nancy in his arms and planted a kiss on her forehead. Maria, have I ever done anything to make you question my loyalty? Nancy tilted her head. Consider this. Suppose both of us were trapped in a collapsing building. Who would you save? What kind of question is that? Why does everything feel like a trap all of a sudden? We just had a beautiful moment out there, and now I find out that it was your and Nancy's song before it was even ours. What else about our relationship is a lie? No, it's not like that. How can I control that you both like the same song? This is so unfair. For the first time, Nancy saw Jonathan blush. Unbeknownst to him, she had been engaged in a silent battle to stifle her laughter. But his disintegration into a stammering child was finally too much. She let out a small giggle and was suddenly heaving with laughter. Before she could get it under control, Jonathan squinted at her with suspicion. You little demon. You were messing with me the whole time. Nancy arched an eyebrow. I'll have you know, I've unearthed a juicy little secret, but my lips are sealed. Her mind teemed with anticipation, imagining the look on his face when he found out who she really was. Now she just had to figure out how to tell him. And when. So withholding, Jonathan retorted, a mischievous smirk pulling at his lips. He playfully pinned her onto the couch, closing the distance between them with a kiss. Their flirtatious tussle escalated quickly, clothes askew, and laughter echoing through the room. To an outsider, they were the picture-perfect depiction of lovers, lost in their own world. The next day, Jonathan summoned Jack to his office. Did you extend an invite to the Franklin Group for our AI summit this weekend? Jack shook his head in confusion. Sir, we've hosted 3 summits, and you always said not to invite them, that it was their punishment for getting ahead. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Well, it's time we shake things up. Don't take no for an answer, but invite multiple groups that we haven't hosted before. It has to look like a coincidence. Understood, sir. I'll handle it. Also, get in touch with Norman. If he's done helping Steve get set up in Mexico, I want him to get to Houston ASAP and wait there for more information. Jack faltered, then responded. Speaking of Steve, your decision to send him to Mexico hasn't been received well by your sister. Jonathan was unfazed. I'll address it with her tomorrow. Just make the necessary arrangements. Jack nodded. Might I suggest you tell Steve why you send him as well? Make him aware of how this benefits him. It might help calm the waters. Jonathan glanced up, a grin tugging at his lips. And what were my reasons exactly? Jack ventured. It was a thoughtful gesture by you to give him some time to get over his breakup. Besides, if everything goes well in Mexico, it could greatly enhance his image, thereby laying the groundwork for a succession if anything were to happen to you. That would make everything with his mother seem like nothing but a misunderstanding. Jonathan's eyes scanned over a document laid open before him, and his voice became as hard as steel. You're forgetting one thing, Jack. What's that, boss? I don't have to explain anything to any of them. Ever. The next day, Nancy received Jacob's passport, and Jonathan got confirmation that Stark would be attending the summit. What they didn't know was that inside the glimmering office towers of the Franklin Group headquarters, Stark was making plans of his own. As he sat at his desk reviewing a contract titled Franklin Group Global Spokesperson, his assistant knocked at his grandiose office door. Amelia's on the line. She's wrapped up her shoot, and she's set to return tonight. Stark didn't even look up. Tell her I'm not here, and also that I've booked her a promotional shoot starting the day after tomorrow. She'll have to go straight there. Yes, sir. And one more thing. You had legal triple-check this contract for Maria, right? I don't want any surprises from Amelia if everything goes according to plan in New York. They've promised it's ironclad. Amelia's non-compete and NDO are binding. She'll have no more recourse unless she's prepared to lose everything. Then call me a car. I have a plane to catch. Stark settled back into his plush upholstery of his desk chair, and a sick grin curled onto his lips. The next day, Nancy and Esther were headed to lunch after yet another promotional shoot for Unique. Times Square thrummed with people, and as they stood in line at a trendy cafe, Nancy's eyes suddenly fell on a familiar silhouette. She immediately grabbed Esther by the shirt and pulled her behind a group of tourists. Esther yanked out of Nancy's grasp, confused. Chill, girl. This shirt costs more than yours. Actually, never mind. Everything you're wearing is amazing. But still, chill. Nancy's voice came back as an urgent whisper. Esther, be quiet. Stark is right behind you. On the street, 3 o'clock. She felt Esther's entire body tense and watched her gaze dart stealthily through the throng and onto Stark. Her face morphed into a steely mask. I'm going to kill him. Esther moved to confront Stark, but Nancy leapt in front of her. Esther, no! You have no idea how many men he has with him. You'd never get out of here alive. We have to bide our time, okay? Nancy glanced over and saw Stark spot her through the crowd. Damn it, he spotted me. You get out of here. I'll distract him. Esther's voice tremored. I can't leave you alone. I've dealt with him before, and I'll do it again. Nancy was unwavering, and she was surprised by her own confidence. I'll use this as an opportunity to build a solid alibi. We both know he's going to lose it when we get Jacob into hiding. Esther hesitated before giving a reluctant nod. All right, I'll keep a close watch from nearby. With that, she melted into the crowd and disappeared from sight. By the time Nancy turned back around, Stark was upon her. Miss Miller! With all these chance meetings of ours, I'm starting to think the universe is trying to tell us something. Nancy put on a show of surprise. Stark! What a coincidence. What brings you to New York? The AI Summit. Stark supplied smoothly. Though since you ask, there's another task I hope to accomplish while I was here. An even more important one, in my opinion. The very future of the Franklin Group hangs on it. Nancy widened her eyes. Wow, sounds serious. Well, don't let me hold you back. Stark smiled at her hungrily. Nancy struggled to hide her revulsion, but she knew she had to stay focused on the mission. Jonathan had made all the preparations for Jacob's extraction later that night, and Nancy had to walk a tightrope with Stark if she was going to get to Houston without either him or Jonathan finding out. Stark put an arm around her. On the contrary, Maria, you're exactly the solution to my problem. Why don't we find a place to sit, and I'll buy you a dessert, as long as you don't think your boyfriend would mind. Nancy's mind raced. Having a boyfriend was a useful buffer, with a man as image-conscious as Stark. But if he knew they had broken up, and she lied to him, he might become suspicious. She couldn't afford to risk it, so she looked at him and shrugged. A dessert sounds fine, and Steve and I actually broke up. Stark frowned. What a pity. Then clear your calendar, Miss Miller. I insist on making this entire day a celebration. Nancy shook her head, taken aback. A celebration? Of what? Of new partnerships. He grinned at her with wild eyes, and Nancy sighed deeply, following his lead into the cafe. Nancy followed Stark into the cafe, where he paid off the host for a private table and then ushered Nancy over. Tell me, Maria, what kind of ice cream would tickle your taste buds most? Nancy wanted to scream every time Stark flirted with her, but she saw another opportunity to put distance between herself and Stark's memory of Nancy. She'd order the flavor she'd always hated most. Chocolate sounds great. Their ice cream quickly arrived, and Nancy choked down her first bite, with Stark watching her the whole time. Finally, he spoke up. You know, Maria, I saw one of your new ads for Unique. As fate would have it, our current contract is about to expire, and I was hoping I might be able to tempt you to join the team. Nancy paused, taken aback. Her mind raced to consider all the possibilities, primarily what was in it for Stark. Thinking fast, she went for false modesty. Stark, I'm shocked, and also deeply humbled that you think I would be a good fit for such a prestigious brand. But shooting that little perfume ad was already nerve-wracking. I'm a scientist, not a model. That's what makes you a perfect fit. Brains and beauty. The car being sold by the person who made it. You know, eventually. Nancy blushed with rage, but managed to play it off as embarrassment. Stark gently put his hand on hers. Just take some time to think about it before you say no. Suddenly, his eyes lit up with an idea. You know what? Why don't you join me for an exclusive preview of our new luxury model tomorrow morning? I'll arrange a private test drive for us, and you can see what you'd be representing up close. It really is a technological marvel. Nancy's eyes sparked with curiosity. If Stark was offering her an opportunity to spy on behalf of her team, she wasn't going to turn him down. Does the new model differ significantly from the Phoenix? Stark nodded, and a mysterious smile played on his lips. Let's just say it makes our first experiment shine a little less brightly, and I'm hoping you'll do the same. The next morning, Nancy arrived at the racetrack that Stark had booked for the event and found a fleet of sleek, all-black cars arrayed for the press and industry bigwigs. Even the master manipulator Stark pulled Nancy to the front of the crowd and publicly introduced her as the woman we hope will be the new face of the Franklin Group. She demurred when the press rained questions down on her, but shamed herself internally for falling into Stark's trap. He had gotten exactly what he wanted by creating a story in the press, and she'd wandered right into it. She had to shake it off, though. All that mattered today was getting as much information about Franklin Group's AI advancements as she possibly could. Stark led Nancy to a car and opened the door with a flourish. Step right in, Maria. As Nancy settled into the car, Stark followed suit, sitting across from her in the spacious, futuristic cabin. Because there was no need for front seats or steering wheels, the cabins could be far more communal without changing the overall dimensions of the car. The interiors were plush and pristine. White coffee table rose out of the floor to present them with a stunning cake and an array of refreshments. Stark pressed a button, and the engine purred to life, filling the cabin with a piano concerto and adjusting the ratio of internal and external lighting to achieve a present mood. As Nancy marveled at the speed and accuracy of the car's operations, the scent of fresh flowers washed over her. In an instant, the cabin had transformed into a sensory delight. She hated to admit it, but it was an incredible feat of design. Thankfully, design was the least of Nancy's concerns when it came to her own car. After all, when the time arrived to think about colors and fabrics, she had access to Esther, the greatest designer of all. Today, Nancy was only interested in what was under the hood. Stark flashed a radiant smile at Nancy's apparent interest. "If you think that's impressive, just wait until you try the cake. I had the baker flown over from Vienna specifically for this event." He then produced an envelope and set it next to her. On the front were 4 prominent words: Franklin Group Spokesperson Contract. "For you to peruse at your own leisure. I think you'll find the terms I'm offering to be quite generous." With a gallant display of curiosity, Nancy masked her disdain and pretended to delve into the document. Satisfied, Stark picked up a nearby knife and sliced a piece of cake for Nancy. "Business can wait. Let's savor this dessert first. It's chocolate. Your favorite." Nancy's gaze dropped to the cake, and she laughed internally. She was glad he had noticed her ice cream order, but she couldn't believe she was going to suffer through a second chocolate dessert in 2 days. Preferring to get it over with, she ate quickly, each bite tasting like an exquisitely sweet poison. When she finally finished the cake, Nancy looked around the car and frayed naivety. "So you said this car differs from the Phoenix. What makes it so special?" Stark's eyes glittered, and he dropped his guard. "Besides all the amenities, the biggest upgrade was the radar system. I can't name any names, but we recently acquired one of the world's foremost experts." "Wow, that must really improve its safety performance." "Precisely. Let's say a stray cat darts in front of the car on a dimly lit highway. Our new radar can detect movement within a 100-mile radius in all directions, so it would have seen and tracked the cat's movements for multiple seconds before a human eye could even detect it. This car will make road deaths a thing of the past." "So the Phoenix can't do that?" "They had a more limited monitoring range, and the response time of the algorithm left a little to be desired. But in this business, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. It's still a very safe car." As Nancy continued to prod Stark about his car's technical specs, she glanced out the window and realized they'd left the racetrack and turned into a tree-lined avenue. The car, filled with soft piano music and dreamy shadows, contrasted beautifully with the filtered sunlight and towering trees outside. If Nancy's sworn enemy wasn't sitting across from her, she would have thought the scene was idyllically romantic. Seeming to sense Nancy's comfort, Stark decided it was time to shoot his shot. He picked up the contract and handed it to her. "I hope this little preview has conveyed the excellence of the products you'll be representing for us. A breathtaking spokesperson for a breathtaking car. How about it?" Nancy's mind whirled. There seemed to be countless upsides and downsides alike, and that wasn't even taking Jonathan's reaction into consideration. She felt she still needed to poke more holes in Stark's presentation, so she feigned a hint of distress. "The offer is really generous, but I'm still in the midst of my internship at the Davis Group. If I become your spokesperson, wouldn't that be a conflict of interest?" "We're not asking you to quit your internship. We just need a face that can authentically represent the brand. But the Franklin Group is also a family, so if you wanted to pursue other opportunities with us after the contract finishes, we'd certainly find a place for you." "What about Amelia? I don't want to upset her again." Stark shook his head solemnly. I can't apologize enough for her behavior. To be honest, she'll be taking some time away from work soon to recover her mental health. I fear the psychological ravages of Hollywood and modeling have gotten to her lately, despite my attempts to keep them at bay. Nancy narrowed her eyes. If she knew Stark, Amelia would have no idea what he was planning. She couldn't deny the appeal of driving the wedge even further between them. Mistaking Nancy's silence for uncertainty, Stark chimed back in. As for your internship, I have a one-on-one meeting with Jonathan tomorrow. I'll run it all by him and make sure the arrangement is suitable for both companies. With Stark's elaborate reassurances, Nancy was finding the idea more and more intriguing. No one would suspect a college student spokeswoman to be stealing tech secrets, and access to Stark would only stand to help her revenge plans in the long run. Jonathan might oppose it, but she thought she could convince him. She lifted her gaze to Stark and spoke earnestly. If Mr. Davis approves, then I'll be glad to join the Franklin Group family. And on behalf of my family, thank you so much for the generous offer. Wonderful. You're worth every penny. And if you encounter any hurdles along the way, don't hesitate to reach out. My door is always open to our company's top talent. Thank you, Stark. I'll do that. Nancy smiled, shook his hand, and looked him dead in the eyes. In that moment, she realized just how far she'd come since they ran into each other at Houston University. She finally felt confident enough to go toe-to-toe with a stone-cold killer. The next morning, Nancy awoke with determination. Today was the day she was going to rescue her brother, once and for all. The Davis Group's AI Summit began at 9 a.m., and Nancy attended in an eye-catching dress so that she could be sure to get the attention of attendees and the press. Jonathan and Stark would both be distracted for large parts of the day, so having documented proof of her attendance was a crucial part of Nancy's alibi. The crowd soon grew large enough for her to slip out unnoticed, so when Jonathan and Stark left for their afternoon panels and meetings, Nancy met Esther in the parking lot to change her clothes and rush to the airport. If she played her cards right, she could get to Houston, save Jacob, and get back safely before Jonathan even knew she was gone. Later that afternoon, Jonathan stepped out of his meeting with Stark and felt a sudden urge to speak with Maria. He tried both texts and calls, but both went undelivered. He soon learned that she hadn't posted anything on social media since breakfast, and that Esther wouldn't reply to his calls either. He wanted desperately to trust her, but he had seen her do this before, and each time it was the same. He couldn't shake the feeling that she had left for Houston in secret, so he rushed to the security office at the convention center and demanded to see the recordings from their surveillance cameras. When he finally spotted Nancy slipping out, changing clothes, and speeding off with Esther, his grip on the computer mouse became so tight that it shattered in his hand. He turned to Jack with a look that was equal parts fury and fear. I need to get to Houston. Now. Jonathan's flight to Houston climbed into the night sky, while Nancy's was just touching down. As soon as she was out of the terminal, she called Norman. Norman, I've landed in Houston. I need a ride. Norman sounded taken aback. I thought you were supposed to stay in New York. Change of plans. We found out we needed another piece of tech to get Jacob out, and I'm the only one that can operate it. Does Jonathan know about this? He sent it to me himself. All right, I'll have someone there in 15 minutes. Nancy laughed to herself. Norman was so easy to fool. As the car sped along Houston's highways to the other side of town, Nancy found herself lost in a whirlwind of nostalgia. When she finally spotted the silhouette of her family home in the distance, she picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. The call was quickly answered, but there was only silence on the other end. Nancy took a deep breath. Is this Sandy? I've always admired your work. The tension in Nancy's voice was palpable, and her heart pounded as she waited for a response. Finally, it came through. Jacob's response was a patterned tap on the phone speaker, a duo of long beats followed by a short one. It was a coded language they had agreed on, and an affirmation that Jacob was alone. Nancy sighed in relief, and her voice became firm. Freedom is within your grasp, Jacob. Say you're going outside to exercise, and in 5 minutes, the entire neighborhood will plunge into darkness. As soon as that happens, run for the road, and don't stop until you see headlights. We'll take care of the guards. The same pattern of taps came through from Jacob's end. Be careful. I'll see you soon. As Nancy hung up, the car gracefully pulled to the side of the road, and she stepped out, removing a small shovel from her backpack. She made eye contact with Norman, and he nodded at her gravely. He pulled a small radio from his pocket and spoke into it. All set. Kill the lights. At that moment, a blackout plunged the entire neighborhood into an abyss of darkness. Norman's men quickly scaled the front gate and incapacitated the unsuspecting guards. Nancy followed quickly behind them, and as the gate swung open, she saw the thin profile of a teenage boy sprinting towards her. Voices behind him called out with increasing alarm. Jacob, where are you? Somebody get the damn lights back on. I can't see the kid. It's not safe, Jacob. Come back to the house. As he passed through the iron gate, Nancy wrapped him in a hug and choked back tears. Jacob, you're almost there. She leaned back and thrust a passport and a plane ticket into his hand. Take this and get on the flight to New York. There will be someone waiting at the airport to help you. As Jacob clutched the passport, his lips trembled as if he wanted to speak. Nancy recognized his fear and spoke up. I still have something important to take care of here, but I promise I'll be safe. Just get yourself to New York, and I'll meet you there tomorrow. His eyes brimmed with unshed tears, but Jacob could only nod in silent response. Nancy gave him one final hug, and as he took off toward the car, Nancy bolted into the mansion's yard. She still had one more thing to retrieve. Just as she passed through the gates, Norman spotted her and took off in pursuit, calling out in a shouted whisper. Maria, what are you doing? Meanwhile, in New York City, Stark had just stepped out of a dinner party and found himself wondering about Maria's whereabouts. He reached for his phone to text her when an incoming call jolted him. Sir, I'm calling from HQ to inform you that Jacob received a call from an encrypted number a few minutes ago. Totally untraceable. We're dealing with a pro. Stark's blood ran cold. Call the staff to lock down the property and mobilize a defense team. The man suddenly fell silent, and Stark's eyes narrowed in rage. Did you hear me? Yes, boss, but it looks like something's gone horribly wrong. A blackout hit the entire area, and Jacob's tracker has been disabled. Lock down the property. Now. The man's voice wavered, heavy with panic. We've been trying to reach the guards, but they aren't responding. Security feeds are down. It's like the whole place went dark. Stark clenched his fist, and a momentary silence swept over him. Then, a ferocious growl rumbled from deep within him. Let me make myself perfectly clear. If they don't find Jacob, I'm going to personally cut their eyes out so they can never find anything again. At that moment, Nancy fell to her knees in the yard and began frantically digging with her shovel. Norman shouted at her to get back to the car, but when shadowy figures began to rise from the periphery, Norman stood over her like a lethal shadow, guarding her from any danger. The second she wrapped her fingers around the slick box buried in the dirt, a harsh flood of illumination filled the darkness. Norman spat, reacting instantly. Backup generators! We need to get out of here, now! He yanked a ski mask from his pocket and thrust it over Nancy's face to hide her from the cameras, then smeared his own with dark soil. Nancy snatched the box she'd unearthed, and they bolted back towards the gate. Unfortunately, their path was suddenly blocked by Stark's reinforcements, who had converged on the entrance with terrifying speed. An immediate brawl ignited, and though the light provided by the backup generator offered little visibility, it was clear that Norman's team was outnumbered. With Nancy huddled safely behind him, Norman grabbed a gardening hoe and began a storm of destruction, repelling a half-dozen men in a matter of seconds. He turned back to Nancy. Get ready. We're making a break for it." His voice was barely audible over the chaos. "On my signal, run as fast as you can toward the car." The situation quickly spiraled as more men sprinted down from the house, and a high-voltage electric fence buzzed to life around the property, its ghastly blue illumination dancing across the dark canvas of the night sky. Norman's eyes went wide with urgency. "Let's go! Hurry!" Norman cleared a savage path through their attackers, and Nancy heard a desperate cry cut through the pandemonium. "If Jacob gets away, Stark will kill us all! Don't fall back!" Determination seemed to surge in Stark's men, and Nancy and Norman were once again swallowed by the bedlam. She dashed toward the getaway car, while Norman fought off their pursuers. When he finally caught up and hurled her into the car, a sharp scent of blood wafted into her nostrils, and her fingers brushed against something slick on his abdomen. A knot of fear tightened in Nancy's stomach. "Norman, you're bleeding!" "Don't you think I know that?" He sprawled into the back seat as one of his men leapt into the front. The car roared to life, and the driver floored it, throwing up a cloud of burned rubber. Nancy turned to Norman. "I always thought you hated me. Why save me?" His response was gruff, a mix of bitter resentment and seething pain. "Boss's orders." The driver revved the engine into a raw, primal roar, and Nancy could hear the growl of Stark's men hopping into cars and speeding after them. A relentless chase unfurled while Norman stripped off his shirt to take care of his wounds. One of his hands had been stabbed clean through, and he had a deep slash on his abdomen. Nancy's eyes went wide with fear, but Norman remained utterly composed. He ripped his shirt into half with a grunt and tied the scraps tightly around his cuts, using his teeth to clinch down the bandage on his hand. She could only watch with stunned awe. He had the ruthless precision of a seasoned soldier, and long shadows whipping by emphasized his blunt features and stony air. Suddenly, the driver spoke up. "Norman, they're getting pretty close, and I'm giving her all she's got." Norman sprung up to look through the front windshield. "Intersection up ahead. Time to change the game." "Copy that." With a mechanical click, the SUV's rear door flew open. In a swift, seamless motion, Norman launched himself from the back seat into the trunk and upturned a large chest, sending a shower of sharpened metal cascading onto the street behind. The first two pursuing cars hit the tire spikes head-on and spun out, slamming into each other and drawing two more cars into a massive pileup. The final car managed to swerve around both the accidents and the spikes and gunned its engine to get within a few feet of Nancy and Norman's car. Norman shook his head. "Modified car, faster than ours. Push it to the limit up there. We just need to find some traffic and we can lose them." With that, the driver redlined the engine, wringing every last ounce of power from it. Nancy watched her old neighborhood flash by outside, and she couldn't believe that the sleepy street of her childhood were now stained with so much blood. She glanced at the car behind them, its headlights now inches away from their bumper. Its engine roared in defiance, echoing through the darkness of the night. Norman suddenly spoke again. "They're going to ram us. Strap in." Nancy fussed with a seatbelt, but Norman suddenly snatched her into a protective hold, sandwiching her between him and the front passenger seat. "Brace yourselves." Just as Norman locked down his grip on Nancy, a car erupted out from the side road, blitzing toward them at an unthinkable speed. Nancy's eyes narrowed. "Is that?" Norman cut her off. "Jonathan's car." The sharp screech of tires filled the air as Jonathan's car skimmed past Norman and Nancy's and slammed into the car behind them. Before Nancy could process what had happened, a monstrous explosion detonated and sent their car into a chaotic drift along the wide road, tires wailing in protest. The world seemed to freeze in time as their car jerked to a halt, an abrupt end that was as startling as the fiery crash behind them. The moment Norman unclenched his grip, Nancy bolted out of the car and dashed toward the inferno. Norman tried to stop her, but he doubled over in pain from his wound. "Jonathan, where are you?" Nancy had never run so fast, so desperately. The hot air coming off the wreck singed her throat and lungs, but she didn't care. Norman shouted after her, "Get out of there, Maria! The other car could blow any second. But Nancy was a woman possessed. She scrambled over debris and were mere steps from Jonathan's car when a sharp piece of metal tripped her up and she tumbled to the ground. A searing pain flared up her hand as it scraped against something sharp, and as she struggled to rise, an ominous noise rumbled from Jonathan's car. It was a deadly lullaby, humming an imminent second explosion. Pain constricted Nancy's heart as she scanned the wreckage, desperate for any sign of Jonathan, but the brilliance of the devouring fire was all she could see. The humming abruptly faded, replaced by the chilling silence that was the harbinger of the blast. Just as Nancy froze in place, a male voice she immediately recognized burst through the silence. "Maria, run!" Nancy turned to run, but her ankle throbbed mercilessly. Each attempt to move was a new wave of agony. Just when she felt her knees buckle, an arm shot out and seized her. It yanked her upwards and swung her into the air, pulling her into a tight embrace as they fled the impending blast. Nancy's senses were filled with a bitter tang of scorched metal, but beneath that harsh burn was a familiar scent. A cool, fresh aroma that evoked a sense of home. It was so recognizable, so comforting, that Nancy felt tears prick her eyes. Soon, tears streamed down her cheeks, and she couldn't tell if they were from the biting smoke or her overwhelming emotions. She clasped her arms around Jonathan's neck, and her voice trembled. I thought you were..." But her frantic words were suddenly swallowed up by the ferocious roar of a second explosion. Blinding flames reflected in his eyes as the forceful shockwave sent both Nancy and Jonathan sprawling to the ground. As they tumbled, Jonathan nimbly pivoted, rolling and tucking Nancy within his protective embrace. With that, an eerie calm seemed to blanket the scene. Nancy raised her head from the sanctuary of Jonathan's arms and gazed at the raging inferno, surprised by the absence of her previous fear. Her concern for Jonathan had simply eclipsed everything else. Jonathan braced himself on the ground and swiftly assessed Nancy for injuries before hauling her up and striding forward. As Nancy looked at Jonathan, she was stunned to see that he was unscathed. The scant light did little to illuminate him, but Nancy could still discern his sculpted jawline and powerful neck. His face bore no expression, yet he radiated a palpable tension. Jonathan helped Nancy into the car, and she turned to him with a trembling voice. Why? Why are you here?" He shot her a wordless glance, and his intense gaze sent a chill down her spine. Suddenly, Nancy's phone buzzed in her pocket. She answered the video call and was momentarily speechless when she saw Jacob in his disguise. He had gone from the picture of youth to a brooding, considerably older man. His hair had been dyed, his clothes were dark and fashionable, and he even had a fake tattoo sneaking out from under his shirt sleeve. Nancy couldn't help but wonder whether this was really how her brother might look in 10 years, but mostly she was glad that she'd get to find out. Finally, she managed to choke out some words. "You guys are safe, right?" Jacob's escort, one of Norman's men, spoke up on his behalf. "Safe and sound, Maria. Security was a breeze, and we're at the boarding gate." "Good. Stay safe, and I'll see you in a couple days." The man hung up, and Nancy exhaled a sigh that felt like it had been held in for an eternity. Getting through security was like crossing an invisible threshold into safety. Even if Stark had his people watching the entrances, they wouldn't dare drag him out of a secure airport terminal. Moreover, they would never be looking for him in such an elaborate disguise. Nancy looked up just as they took the highway exit in the opposite direction of the airport. She tilted her head. "Where are we going?" Jonathan sat silently, so his driver replied. "The airport is too hot. Stark will have no idea who did this, but if he gets wind of us at the airport, he's certain to get suspicious. And if his camera system came online with the backup generator, he'll have our license plates in no time. We've arranged for a boat to take us to Florida, and we'll take a plane from there." Nancy looked over at Jonathan for confirmation, but he just stared straight ahead. Meanwhile, back in New York, Stark paced in his hotel room, awaiting an update from his men. When his phone finally rang, he picked it up immediately. "You better have good news." "We followed them by car, but they managed to get away. 2 of our vehicles exploded during the chase and killed everyone inside. Idiots! They deserve to die." Stark exploded, and looking for someone to take out his anger on, he grabbed a hotel mug and hurled it at the wall. "What about the airport?" "We sent men to the airport and the train station, and we're patched into all the highway cameras, but there's no sign of Jacob or their cars. It's like he disappeared into thin air." "I'm going to make you disappear into thin air if you don't get me some useful information." "What do I pay you for?" The man's voice became urgent. Do you think maybe he went to the ground somewhere close? Should we check the neighborhood again?" "Power outage, surveillance sabotage, coordinated extraction. It's obvious this was a meticulously planned operation." Stark went silent for a moment, then suddenly had a thought. "Deploy men to the docks, register every ship that leaves the port tonight, and tell everyone else to stay at their posts until I say otherwise. Make it clear that if anyone who fails to follow orders will meet the full force of my wrath." Nancy and Jonathan's car soon arrived at the port of Houston, where a small yacht sat bobbing on the water, prepared to whisk them away. Jonathan lifted Nancy out of the car and carried her onto the boat, along with Norman and a few others. They immediately set off and disappeared into the darkness mere minutes before Stark's men arrived to investigate. Jonathan carried Nancy into their cabin, which, though compact, was no less comfortable than a high-end hotel room. Its only peculiarity was a miniature window that offered a glimpse of the merciless sea outside. With not so much as a whisper, Jonathan set Nancy on the plush couch before spinning on his heel and exiting. The door closed behind him with a click and plunged the room into an abrupt silence. Nancy stared at the door, and her mind raced. He was obviously mad that she'd lied to him about coming to Houston. She knew he'd find out sooner or later, but she expected to be able to tell him herself when she was safely back in New York. It occurred to her that the best explanation might be the truth, that Jacob was her brother, and she was in fact Nancy. But she'd planned to tell him on his birthday, and she couldn't help feeling that the early confession would steal away all the significance. The whine of the cabin door opening yanked her out of her thoughts. Jonathan strode back in and handed her the box she had dug out of the ground. It had been meticulously cleaned of blood and dirt, presumably by him. She couldn't help but notice that he was doing nice things for her, despite his anger. "Thank you, but don't worry about me. Norman is seriously hurt." Acting like he hadn't hurt her, Jonathan gently cradled her foot, examining her swollen ankle under the harsh glare of the cabin lights. He held a bag of ice to it and then applied an ace bandage to keep the ice pressed against her injury. The silence in the room was almost deafening, and a deep shadow played over Jonathan's face, painting him as a picture of icy concentration. To Nancy's surprise, as his skilled hands massaged her aches and dressed her wounds, she found the throbbing in her ankles steadily diminishing. Emotions welled up inside her, leading her to impulsively grab his sleeve. She suddenly noticed that he was still wearing the same clothes he'd worn to the summit that morning, and realized he must have raced straight to the airport. Swallowing her nervousness, Nancy whispered his name. "Jonathan." Again, he gave no response. His lingering anger was palpable, but his focus on treating her ankle never wavered. Nancy understood why he was angry, but decided to try feigning ignorance. She looked up at him with round, innocent eyes. "Are you hungry, honey?" His frown deepened, but he continued to ignore her. Growing frustrated with his silent treatment, Nancy tried another approach. She gave Jonathan's sleeve another tug. This time, she used her hand that had gotten cut in the wreckage. His gaze immediately shifted to it, and his brows knitted together in concern. He lowered her foot, stood abruptly, and exited the room again. When he came back, he was carrying bandages and ointment. A surge of warmth spread through Nancy's heart, and her cheeks tingled with an unanticipated blush. Despite his smoldering anger, Jonathan couldn't mask his deep-rooted concern for her. She quietly observed, as Jonathan bandaged her hand. In the dimly lit cabin, his stern form glowed with an uncanny allure. His face and shirt were marred with black streaks, and he looked like a rugged hero from an action movie. Spotting another opening, Nancy decided to play her part in this poignant scene, the grateful rescuee who would do anything to thank the hero. Nearby, a wet towel caught her eye. Once Jonathan's grip loosened from her hand, she seized the towel and moved towards him, ready to address the battle scars on the man in front of her. Her hand rose to touch his face, and Jonathan froze, his eyes dropping to find hers. With gentle swipes, Nancy cleaned the dirt and blood of his face, trailing down his neck. Jonathan didn't pull away, and as she worked her way down his rippling arms, she shifted position, sitting softly on his lap. Sensing no change in his demeanor, she sighed deeply and finally decided to be direct. She leaned into his chest and spoke in a hushed voice. "I'm sorry. I never meant to betray your trust. I had to come here tonight, and I was afraid you wouldn't understand why." Her apology faltered as she realized the gravity of her next words. If she kept going, it was the moment of truth. But now, in the heat of the moment and under his penetrating gaze, it felt more like a diversion than a celebration of their love. Jonathan's patience appeared to wear thin, and his grip on her waist tightened, like he was about to push her off of him. She clung to his shirt, and the desperation in her voice was palpable. "I promise, Jonathan, it won't happen again." Her cheeks blazed as the apology left her lips, a stark departure from her usually defiant nature. The gravity of today's events wasn't lost on her. Norman was injured. They'd narrowly escaped Stark's men, and the potential consequences were too harrowing to ponder. She had done it for the right reasons, and she genuinely believed that Jonathan would come to see it that way in time, but it was still her fault. "I know that all of this is because of me. I know I put people in danger, but I'm begging you to forgive me and to trust me that when I explain everything, you'll understand that I only did what I had to do." She implored him, moving even closer. Her gaze was fixed on his stern face, and her heartbeat thundered in his ears. His mouth parted, as if to speak for the first time all night, and in a desperate move, Nancy clasped his neck and yanked him forward to silence him with a kiss. The contact sparked a jolt. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, and an involuntary growl vibrated in his throat. But Nancy pressed on, forcefully kissing him with unyielding fervor. His grip around her waist intensified, and the danger radiating off him was suddenly electric. Despite his brooding energy, Nancy continued her advance until her hands were suddenly yanked from the back of his head and a sensation of weightlessness swept over her. Before she knew what had happened, Jonathan had picked her up, spun her in midair, and thrust her against the bed, his body pressed down on hers. He pinned her wrist above her head and stared down at her with a fiery hunger. As she panted helplessly beneath his powerful grasp, she smiled to herself. He'd taken the bait. Nancy let out a breathless gasp as Jonathan pressed his body down on hers. He leaned in to kiss her, but she turned her head to the side, feigning protest. "But we're filthy from running around all day." Jonathan responding with a piercing, predatory gaze, his voice a low whisper. "I don't care." She stammered. "I should clean myself up first." But her protest was met with a powerful kiss, reducing her to a state of total vulnerability. "If you insist, then we'll do it together." Jonathan's voice was as dangerous as it was enticing. He slowly lifted his body off of hers and proceeded to slowly peel his clothes off. Nancy sat up and tried to slip out of bed. "I'm all right, really. I can walk." But Jonathan's response was swift and firm, his hand pressing her back onto the mattress. "Attempting another escape, are we?" Nancy was pinned under his gaze again, her movements restrained. Meanwhile, Jonathan shed the remainder of his clothing, his dominant aura consuming the room. The sight of him, raw and powerful, held her captive. His sinewy muscles overwhelmed her senses, and she was left helpless beneath his gaze, her eyes wide and pleading. Jonathan's lips curled into a tantalizing smirk, his eyes glimmering with an unspoken promise. Is there a part of you I haven't explored? Or any part of me you haven't discovered yet? She found herself speechless as he lifted her up and carried her into the bathroom. With her bare skin pressed against his, an incandescent heat flushed through her body. His strong grip finally relented as he lowered her onto her feet in the shower. Her gaze was unintentionally drawn to his shoulder blades, and the powerful V-shape of his torso left her feeling weak and giddy. She quickly closed her eyes, trying to escape the intensity of the moment. Her breath hitched as his fingers gently sifted through her hair, a surprisingly tender gesture. Her heart fluttered in response, and her voice came out as a timid whisper. Jonathan, I know I owe you an explanation, and I promise you'll get one. But can it wait until your birthday? His answer was teasingly cryptic, his thumb caressing her chin. A month away. I can afford to wait. But will I choose to? She couldn't imagine the storm of emotions he must have endured when he learned what she'd gotten herself into in Houston. His arms tightened around her and possessively lifted her once again. A rush of adrenaline surged through her veins, making her heart pound in her chest. He lowered her into a cascading stream of water coming from the shower and gently cleaned her with a washcloth. His voice was rich and gravelly. How do you feel now? Her lips quivered, and the crimson flush on her cheeks deepened. Better. Thank you. As he shut off the shower and handed her a towel, a soft chuckle escaped him. His teeth gritted in a half smile. Maria, you can't keep getting yourself into trouble. I have to be able to trust that you won't put yourself in danger like that again. I promise, Jonathan. After another fervent embrace, Jonathan tenderly arranged Nancy on the bed. Spreading a gossamer-thin blanket over her, he whispered in a soothing baritone. Rest well now. I just need to look after Norman, and then I'll be back to keep you company. Nancy nodded, and with that, Jonathan exited. Jonathan went to check on Norman and found that he was nearly done being bandaged by the nurse. How does it look? Norman glanced over and grumbled. Like I could use a shower and a cigarette. The nurse rolled her eyes. He got lucky. No major tendon or organ damage. It'll leave a nasty scar, but otherwise he'll be fine. Jonathan nodded and turned back to Norman. Thank you for protecting Maria. Just doing my job. I know you're not her biggest fan, Norman, but you still put your life on the line for her, out of loyalty to me. I want you to know that loyalty will be repaid. Norman and Jonathan locked eyes, and both gave a quick nod of appreciation. Satisfied with Norman's condition, Jonathan slipped into the hall to make a phone call. What's the situation on the ground? Stark's men are scouring the city, but all our people got out, and he didn't get anyone to the port until after you left. I think we're free and clear, boss. And the boy? In the air. Should be landing in New York in an hour. Good. Maintain contact and report any changes. Jonathan disconnected the call and gazed over the Gulf of Mexico. They had narrowly avoided disaster, but the events of the day were interlaced like a tightly woven web, a deadly game of cat and mouse. Memories washed over him like a storm surge. Nancy's insistence that he clean his hand after making contact with Stark at the coffee shop. Her emotional reaction to the debut of the Phoenix. And Stark's violently possessive relationship with Jacob. A chilling hypothesis started to crystallize in Jonathan's mind. Were the untimely deaths of Nancy and her family a calculated act? If so, who stood to benefit? Stark was the obvious answer, but there was less than zero proof. He'd always seemed to be a consummate grieving widow. And where did Maria fall within this convoluted puzzle? Could it really just be a mix-up with Esther? Somehow, that explanation tasted of doubt. Whatever the missing pieces were, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were bound to put him in even greater danger in the weeks ahead. Nancy was teetering on the brink of sleep when the sound of Jonathan's return stirred her. The image of his naked body flashed through her mind, and ignited a blaze within her. She quickly shut her eyes, striving to suppress the rush of emotion. It was only when the mattress sagged under his weight, his arms folding around her in a protective embrace, that her heart began to slow. Beyond the walls of their cabin, the ocean sang its ceaseless lullaby, the waves gently caressing the sides of the boat as the dark cloak of night embraced them. Suddenly, an unwelcome specter of the past gripped Nancy's mind. The sound of the waves sent her spiraling back to the terrifying time when Stark and Amelia had burned her alive, casting her and her father adrift on an uncaring sea. She breathed in Jonathan's scent and tried to calm her nerves. After all, fate had intervened. She'd emerged on the other side as Maria, and her path had intertwined with Jonathan's. He'd been her anchor in this storm, even going as far to aid in Jacob's rescue without a full explanation why. His steady presence had emboldened her to dream of a future beyond revenge, where she and her loved ones might finally live in peace. Lost in her thoughts, she found herself wanting to steal a glance at Jonathan, but the moment her eyes fluttered open, she found herself locked in his gaze. A surge of warmth flooded her cheeks. Mustering her courage, she stared back into his eyes, her voice a low murmur. "Thank you, Jonathan, for everything." Without muttering a word, he leaned in and brushed his lips tenderly against her forehead. "I know you have questions." Her voice was a soft whisper, but her gaze was unflinching. "On your birthday, I'll answer all of them. Can you wait for me until then?" Jonathan nodded. "I can, Maria." Nancy smiled. She was fond of rituals like this, and it appeared he shared her sentiment. Back in New York, Starks was marooned in a sea of worry. His mind raced, dissecting the events of the meticulously plotted scheme against him. For 3 long years, there had been no disruptions, no intrusions. Ever since he dealt with Esther, there hadn't even been a whiff of suspicion around Nancy and her parents. Was it merely a coincidence that someone had targeted Jacob? Or had someone been waiting in the shadows, biding their time until Stark lowered his guard? Weighing the aggressive onslaught his men had endured, Stark leaned towards the latter. But who was left that still cared whether the Johnson family had lived or died? With a frown etched deep on his face, Stark considered his standing within Houston's affluent class. He'd been careful not to make any outright enemies, but the Franklin Group would always have a target on its back. Not to mention the fact that Texas was littered with powerful oil and automotive companies, and Stark sought to make them all obsolete with his electric, autonomous vehicles. Identifying the culprit from such a teeming list of potential adversaries was like finding a needle in a haystack. Or worse, what if there was no hay at all, and they were all needles? His paranoid thoughts finally drifted to the Davis Group. Their unexpected invitation to the AI summit suddenly seemed suspect, and it was no secret that Jonathan had been pouring resources into his own autonomous vehicle. Could Jonathan be the puppet master pulling Jacob's strings? If so, what was the endgame? Was he after Jacob's shares in the Franklin Group? Doubtful. Jonathan had to know that the U.S. government would never allow one man to control a company as large as the Davis Group and Franklin Group combined. Stark grappled with these questions throughout a long, sleepless night, interrupted only by updates from his team. Despite successfully passing the explosions off as a terrible car accident, one undeniable fact remained. Jacob had disappeared into the ether, seemingly evaporating from existence. Not a single clue had arisen as to his whereabouts, and in frustration, Stark felt like a coiled serpent, biting and hissing within him. He'd spent long, agonizing years plotting the takeover of the Franklin Group, and now an unforeseen adversary threatened to bring everything tumbling down. As the dawn's first light perforated Stark's gloom, he tersely ordered his assistant to cancel his flight home. Even if he returned to the scene, he couldn't undo what had happened. It was far more important for him to maintain an ironclad facade. Any cracks would be like blood in the water for whoever sought to destroy him. Besides, there was every chance that his opponent was among the crowd at the AI summit. Perhaps the daylight would reveal some clues. At the stroke of 9, Stark arrived at the convention center with a broad smile and an immaculate suit. To everyone watching him, it would have looked like nothing had ever happened. After a night of little sleep, Nancy and Jonathan arrived in New York at 7 a.m. and rushed straight back to the summit to maintain their alibis. The exhibition hall hummed with activity as the morning light shone in, but Nancy found herself increasingly unable to summon her typical charm and joie de vivre. With her ankle throbbing and her mind drifting, she retreated to a far corner of the convention center and opened a folder of documents, pretending to study them. She immediately thought of Jacob and yearned to see him. She pulled out her phone and began sending him a message when a voice suddenly interrupted her. "I knew something was missing from the showroom this morning. Your radiance is really being wasted over there." Nancy looked up. It was Stark. She shot out of her chair, fumbling with her phone in a desperate attempt to keep him from seeing it. "Stark, good morning. I'm surprised you aren't being cornered by a mob somewhere begging for details on the new car." Stark winked. "I'd rather be in whatever corner you're in. Why are you over here with your nose buried in data? Jonathan wouldn't give you a day off work?" Nancy shook her head. No. I got a bit of a stomach bug and didn't feel like mingling. To be honest, I could get in trouble if he finds out I'm not there representing the Davis Group. So can we keep this between us?" Laughter bubbled up from Stark, and his mouth curled into a wry grin. "Your secret's safe with me. On one condition." Nancy's eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" "Don't look so suspicious. Let's have lunch. Just us." "I don't know. Slacking off is bad enough. If Mr. Davis caught me leaving early, I'd be dead." "Then we'll find something around here. That way, if Jonathan catches us, it'll look like we're having a perfectly natural meeting. We'll be in on the secret together." Nancy opened her mouth to reply, but she was cut off by a deep voice, filled with intrigue. Well. What are you two plotting over here?" Nancy locked eyes with Jonathan as Stark pivoted to see who had interrupted them. Her voice fluttered with surprise. "Jonathan! I've just promised Stark that I'll meet him over lunch. I swear, I wasn't playing hooky." A spark lit up Jonathan's eyes, and his lips twisted into an amused smirk. "What do you think of another joining the party? I'd love to hear what the CEO of the Franklin Group hoped to get from a meeting with one of my interns." "Of course," Nancy blurted out. Her eyes sparkled with unabashed enthusiasm. Just like always, Jonathan had arrived at the perfect time to rescue her. Stark seemed less enthusiastic, but maintained a polite smile. "Naturally. I hope to have a less formal meeting with you while I was here. Why not now?" Jonathan beamed. "Excellent. My treat. But then I will have to go see that my employees here get back to work." With a quick wink to Nancy, Jonathan led the way out. As the trio sat down to lunch, Nancy's phone suddenly hummed with an unfamiliar number. She opened the message and had to hold back a gasp as she read it. "Sister, this is Jacob. I got a new number, and I'm safe in a hotel with people watching over me. I'll never be able to thank you enough." Reading the word sister triggered a pang in Nancy's heart. Had he somehow figured it out? Or was he just being polite? She was desperate to run out of the restaurant and see him, but she knew it was impossible. With Stark still around, she had to maintain an air of utter normalcy. That meant waiting until he left New York before seeing Jacob face to face. Nonetheless, her heart soared with relief that Jacob was nearly free. All she needed to do was bring him the optical membrane and the box she dug up, and then the final moves could be executed. Stark's voice finally broke her out of her daydream. "Maria, do you think it's finally time we tell Jonathan about our little arrangement?" Nancy's eyes went wide, while Jonathan's eyebrows drew together. His gaze snapped to Nancy and radiated possessiveness. In a way, Nancy liked it. Seeming to sense her hesitation, Stark continued. "To be clear, this was entirely my idea, and Maria insisted we get your approval before moving forward. To get to the point, I asked Maria to be the face of my brand for the coming year, and she accepted." Nancy finally spoke with a whisper of remorse in her voice. I'm so sorry for the surprise, Jonathan. I'm so grateful for my position at the Davis Group. But my family's financial straits left me little choice but to accept the proposal. Pending your agreement, of course. Stark interjected again. I assure you, my motives were devoid of hidden agendas. I simply see Maria as the perfect embodiment of our product's ethos. All of her work would be here in New York and wouldn't conflict with her weekday responsibilities. Jonathan took a moment to digest the news, and Nancy's heart raced with anticipation. She really had meant to tell him about Stark's offer, but it had slipped her mind in all the chaos with Jacob. In reality, she intended to use the position to steal secrets on behalf of the Davis Group, but Jonathan had flown off the handle over much less. She just had to hope he would trust her. Finally, Jonathan sighed and spoke directly to Nancy. I don't love the idea, but I see no reason to stop it. Maria, remember your non-disclosure agreement. I trust you'll honor it. Of course. Nancy's voice was resolute and subservient, but her eyes held a glimmer of mischief that she was certain Jonathan picked up on. She couldn't help thinking that they really had become an impressive team. Suddenly, Jonathan's phone rang. He looked concerned and immediately picked up. Hello, Mr. Reynolds. What is it? Nancy heard James's voice filter through the phone, wrought with distress. Jonathan, it's Kim. She's been rushed to the ICU, and her condition is critical. Jonathan shot up from his seat, his face taut with worry. Which hospital? Bellevue. James's voice was on the edge of breaking. The doctors. They say they've done everything they can. There's an advanced research facility in Seattle that has an experimental treatment, and I want to airlift her there as soon as possible. Jonathan's gaze hardened. There are no other options? James sounded like he was sobbing now. Nothing. And I tried reaching out to the research center, but they wouldn't take my call. Can you help her, Jonathan? I'll take care of it. Tell the doctors to prepare her for immediate travel. Jonathan hung up and turned to Stark. I'm sorry to run out, but a friend's life is in the balance. I have to go. With that, he charged out of the restaurant without even glancing back. Stark stared after Jonathan, then swiveled his gaze back to Nancy. I've never seen him so unsettled. Was that about his girlfriend? Fiancé? Nancy shook her head and smiled obliviously. I really couldn't say. The boss's private life tends to stay private at the Davis Group. A wry smirk teased at Stark's lips. Oh, really? Perhaps I've been too indulgent with my own employees. They seem to take great delight in ribbing their boss. He scooted his chair back and stood. Excuse me, will you? I need to use the bathroom. As soon as Stark turned his back to Maria, his gentle smile transformed into a devious one. He got out of earshot, pulled out his phone, and dialed his assistant. Find me everything you can on a Kim Reynolds from New York City. Father is James Reynolds. Do it now. 2 minutes later, his assistant came back on the line. Sir, there's not much on her. Her mother died during childbirth, and her father owns one of the biggest pharmacology labs in the world. From what I can tell, it seems she's been in poor health from the very beginning. Rumor has it that she and Jonathan have been dating in secret for over a decade, but I've never seen an average person like her with less information online. She's clearly being protected by someone powerful. Stark hung up and exhaled a sigh of relief. He'd been fretting needlessly. Jonathan's abrupt departure had nothing to do with Jacob, and his possessiveness over Maria was merely a man's natural attraction. It was obvious that he was beholden to this Kim woman and keeping it a secret in order to protect her. When Stark finally returned to the table, Nancy was studying a text from Jonathan. It read, Maria, I'm sorry I had to run out like that. I think we dispelled any suspicions Stark might have had, but I expect your relationship with him to be brief. If you're going to be the true face of a company, it's going to be mine. A touch of sardonic humor flitted across Nancy's face, and she looked up at Stark with a grin. Sounds like Mr. Davis approves. What's the next move? Just another day at the office, Stark replied with practiced ease. I've given the go-ahead for my team to pencil in your shoots during the weekend, so they'll be in touch to arrange times that work best for you. Nancy acknowledged with a crisp nod, and Stark continued. As for today, the stars have aligned. Our ad team has officially been relocated to New York, and the designers would love to meet with you this afternoon. After lunch, Nancy and Stark went to the studio to meet with his designers. There was a circular stage with a gleaming phoenix at the center. Its graceful silhouette and luxurious finish exuded an aura of opulence. Nancy hated that Stark was benefiting so greatly from it, but she couldn't help feeling emotional seeing it displayed on stage like a piece of art. No matter what, the soul of that car would always belong to her. Before long, the wardrobe team rolled over a clothes rack with nearly a dozen outfits tailored perfectly to Nancy's size. She slipped into the first dress, and the photographer gestured for her to approach the car. Just as she laid her hand on one of its powerful curves, she heard a door slam in the distance. From down the hall, the clatter of high heels grew increasingly pronounced, until Nancy finally saw the source. Striding in with a ferocious glare, Amelia's gaze swept across the room before landing on Nancy, awash in the glow of the spotlight. Upon noticing Stark's rapt attention on her, a flicker of resentment ignited in Amelia's eyes. "What the hell is this?" Amelia demanded, her tone razor-sharp. Stark ignored her, so the photographer stepped in. "Hi, Amelia. We're just running through a few of Maria's potential looks for the upcoming ad campaign. If you want to take a seat, we'll be done in an hour or so." "A seat? Ha!" Amelia let out a chilling laugh. "I'm supposed to take a seat while co-ed Barbie over here takes my job? What do you even see in her? Or is every random 20-year-old with a pretty face suddenly qualified to be an international spokesperson?" Nancy stared down at the furious woman before her, and an insidious smirk curled on her lips. The fiercer their clash between Amelia and Stark, the more it served her machinations. All she had to do was play along. Stark finally rose to his feet, his face etched with consternation. "Amelia, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be on set." Amelia clenched her fists. "How convenient that while you're out here trying to replace me, I was scheduled for a shoot in the middle of a desert with no television and no cell reception." "Amelia, you're being paranoid. Just get back to Houston and we'll talk in a few days." Amelia shot a calculating glare at Nancy, then turned back to Stark. But her posture suddenly softened, and her voice became somber and vulnerable. "You're right, darling. I'm sorry for assuming the worst. After all we've been through, can I please just have one night to share how I'm feeling? Do I not deserve that?" Stark paused, as if he was considering her request, and Nancy saw her moment. She pinched herself hard to bring tears to her eyes, and let out a pathetic whimper. Stark's attention immediately snapped back to her, and she staggered, pretending to hold back her emotions. To Nancy's delight, Stark's expression hardened, and he shoved Amelia aside. "I'm at work, Amelia, which is also where you should be. We'll discuss personal matters on personal time." Amelia pleaded with him even more desperately, so Nancy let out a loud sob and crumbled to the floor on the stage. A pathetic and desperate image, if there ever was one. Stark turned to Amelia, and it was clear his patience had run out. "You can leave by choice or by force. Those are your options." Amelia's face twisted into a grotesque snarl. "Don't threaten me, unless you're prepared to follow through, honey." With Amelia's tender facade finally shattered, a hush fell over the room. The tension between the two of them felt like it would explode at any moment, and Nancy watched on in utter delight at the devastation to come.